Hello and welcome to session 2. We hope you've had some good conversations since last time. That conversation Nikki and I had last time was a real eye-opener. I had no idea he felt like that when I gave him directions in the car. We're going to be looking at a central aspect of marriage, commitment, and how we put it into practice in our relationship.
There's a romantic myth about that marriage only works if we marry the perfect person. A bachelor asked a computer to find him the perfect partner. He wrote, "I want a companion who is small and attractive, loves water sports and enjoys group activities." The computer answered, "Marry a penguin."
Of course, we must choose carefully and wisely, but marriage is about more than compatibility. This session, we'll be interviewing Jonathan Andrea later, and we'll be hearing from our sofa couples throughout the session about the role of commitment. First, though, we want to ask the question, why is marriage in such trouble today?
Wedding dress trends have definitely changed over the decades, but now it seems marriage itself, for centuries the norm in society, is going out of fashion. So why are so many people turning their backs on marriage, and why do 40% of marriages end in divorce?
People like freedom. We're living in a society where people want to be free.
Because our society's changed, I think, like people are settling down a lot later, they're travelling.
I think it's just old-fashioned, really. I think it's something that was done a long time ago. It's not generally done now. A lot of people are more happy with just being in a relationship.
It's still important, but not perhaps as important as it once was.
I'm from divorced parents, and I don't believe in marriage, actually.
I think a lot of people have turned their backs on marriage because they've seen their parents and the generation of the 60s and 70s divorcing in ever larger numbers. And the real tragedy is that they've got something that really doesn't work nearly as well as marriage. People who stay unmarried are roughly 5 times more likely to split up than their married counterparts in the first 5 years of a baby's life. And that is hugely destructive for a whole new generation of children.
We live in a consumer society. You only need to walk down your high street or turn on your TV to see that we are bombarded by advertisers telling us what we need to be happy and satisfied. We've never had so much choice. I've counted over 40 choices of toothpaste in this pharmacy, and if you don't like what you've bought, you can just throw it away and buy another variety or brand. But it's this throwaway mentality that some experts believe is producing throwaway marriages.
We live in a very throwaway consumer society today. We think short-term, we don't think long-term. And there is a lack of commitment in our attitudes and in our actions. And I do believe that that does affect the way we see relationships and the way that we see marriage.
But while more couples choose to live together than wed, evidence suggests that marriage is still the best option. Researchers have found that on average, married couples are more likely to stay together, have better physical and mental health, are wealthier, more productive, and have better sex lives than those who cohabit. Perhaps if that message was driven home more, then more of us would be rushing out to buy one of these and signing up for lifelong commitment.
The earliest description of marriage that we possess comes at the very beginning of the Bible, in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. "For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh."
Marriage is portrayed as a vital part of God's design for human society, in whatever culture. It's presented as having 2 purposes, for friendship and for family life.
First, let's look at friendship. Marriage is part of God's provision to meet our most fundamental needs.
The first crisis to face mankind was aloneness. When God created the land, the plants, the fish, the birds, and so on, he said each time, "It is good." Then, in Genesis chapter 2, God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone." And so he created Eve.
When Adam is presented with his new wife, Eve, he says spontaneously these words of deep identification. "Here at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." We were clearly created for relationship. We identify with and we need each other. Of course, marriage isn't the only way to counter aloneness, but it is the closest of all human relationships.
Even at the end of a really hard day, just knowing that there's somebody there who can give you a cuddle and tell you that it's going to be all right. Having this constant friend that is always going to be there, definitely.
And for me, I've got quite a stressful job, and even when I'm going through a particular problem at work, I'll perhaps, the thought will come into my mind about Rosie, and I'll know that I'll go home to Rosie and we can talk about it and we can console one another.
Yeah, so...
that's quite something to look forward to.
The word used in the original Hebrew to describe the man being united to his wife is a very strong word, used for joining things or people together in such a way that they can't easily be separated again.
Perhaps the best visual aid of a marriage is to take two pieces of paper and to glue them together. You create, in effect, one new piece of paper with two sides.
It's that joining that meets our longing for relationship. That's why marriage can bring such joy. But it also explains why, if a married couple is torn apart, it brings such pain.
And if I was to take two pieces of paper that had been stuck together and was to try to separate them, I wouldn't be able to do so without causing great damage to both parts.
When a marriage breaks up, it's not two independent people who divide from each other, but two made one.
I've helped out a lot on people going through separation and divorce, and I've seen in every instance there is always pain and hurt, and it's sometimes the most enormous pain and hurt you could ever imagine. I've never seen a painless separation or divorce. It takes years for people to get over it, sometimes 20 years, especially if you've got children. The hurt that you feel, the hurt that your relationships feel, it goes right to your heart, right to your self-confidence. You go through anger, hurt, pain, shame, rejection, low self-confidence, all the feelings you can have, you go through. And it's really difficult to recover from it, but people do.
That's why Jesus said, "What God has joined together, let no one separate." Marriage is part of God's design for society, and its first purpose is for friendship. Marriage meets our need, indeed our craving for intimacy.
The second purpose of marriage is for family life. Marriage is the foundation of family life. I don't know if you've ever thought at any length about the fact that God decided it would take a man and a woman through the most intimate act of which human beings are capable, lovemaking, to produce a child.
Well, we know you didn't come on marriage preparation to learn that. I don't know if you've heard the story of the young boy who was asked to write an essay on his family history. When he got home, he decided to do some research. He approached his mother and asked her, "Mum, where did I come from?" Well, his mother, who wasn't quite prepared for the question, answered, "Well, darling, a stork came and left you under a gooseberry bush." The boy then went to his father and asked him, "Dad, where did you come from?" His father was equally caught unawares and replied, "Well, a stork came and left me under a gooseberry bush." The boy then went and asked his grandmother, "Granny, where did you come from?" Well, Granny didn't quite feel it was her place to explain the facts of life, so she too replied, "Well, darling, a stork came and left me under a gooseberry bush." The boy started his essay, "There has not been a natural birth in our family for at least 3 generations."
It is part of God's plan for every child to be conceived in an act of love between their parents. Further, the ideal is for every child to be born into a home where there is a relationship of committed love between their mother and father, and then to grow up living under the influence of that relationship.
Rob Parsons, director of the UK organisation Care for the Family, believes parents provide an important role model. This is what he said.
I believe that marriage can give kids an incredible foundation. You know, the scary thing about bringing up kids is not so much that they don't do what we tell them. They do so often what they see. And as they see a husband and wife forgiving each other, loving each other, sometimes even hurting each other and getting over it, kids learn deep lessons that last them a lifetime. They don't need to see a perfect marriage. They just need to see two human beings loving each other, changing, growing. And as well, saying to those kids, we love each other and we love you. What you see in us, you will see also in our relationship with you, our children.
The breakdown of marriage has an effect on the next generation. There are many wonderful single parents bringing up children on their own, doing an amazing job. But they're doing so at a disadvantage, as their children grow up without seeing the model of an intimate, committed, long-term relationship between their parents.
If you know that your fiancé is carrying pain from their childhood, it's important to allow them to express what they're feeling. And if your own parents have split up, your marriage is an opportunity to do things differently and possibly to break a cycle of failed relationships in your family or in your own life.
We'd like you to spend 5 minutes now discussing between the two of you the question in your manuals: what, in your view, is the role of marriage in society? Talk together about why you're choosing marriage rather than cohabitation. We want to go on now and look at what we mean by marriage as a covenant relationship. Almost everybody who's getting married believes that marriage is about love. But what is love? We asked people on the south coast of England what they thought.
Love. What does love mean in a marriage? What does it mean in marriage? You know what? It's a really hard question. I ain't got a clue, actually.
It means caring for one another.
Putting each other's feelings first.
It means supporting one another.
Putting each other's wants and needs first.
Listening to each other.
Love, it's all down to feelings. How you feel about a person.
It's a whole thing, and I think that's why I can't define it to any one thing.
If you don't have that feeling, there's no love at all.
You've got to be with them for the rest of your life. You've got to love them.
Struggle and drive.
I think love is what you feel for someone, whatever.
I think love absolutely underpins marriage.
Love is absolutely essential to marriage.
Marriage is love.
So, the word love can have lots of meanings. There are the feelings of love over which we have little or no control. We call this type of love infatuation, which is a chemical process that, according to psychologists, can last anything from 3 minutes to 3 years. And in any marriage, these feelings will come and go.
And then there's the love that is deliberate, that's cultivated over a period of time.
A friend of ours who came on our marriage course 7 years ago wrote a letter to the press recently saying this: "What I've learned is that the roller coaster of my emotions isn't a good indicator of the health of our marriage. And winning power struggles with my wife is a pointless exercise. What works is treating our marriage as our most precious possession and investing time in it. That translates into my willingness to be wrong, to spend time doing fun things together, to listen to her when I have a lot of things to do, to help her out even when I'm busy, not to score points, not to blame her for everything that goes wrong in my life, and to wait for a good moment to discuss difficult issues. So the fact that we're more in love than ever is no accident."
We can't control infatuation, but we can nurture the other deliberate kind of love. And the covenant relationship of marriage is the setting for it.
A covenant is different to a contract. A contract is a legal document that outlines the rights and the duties of each party. A contract defines precisely the kind and the amount of service being offered by each side.
But a covenant relationship is much deeper and is based on a promise. In a covenant relationship, partners are bound together not by a set of legal requirements, but by love.
Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sacks commented recently on many people's perception of marriage. He said, "How devastating it is that marriage seems to have lost its power in society as a whole. A wedding ceremony is more than a formality and a piece of paper because it involves commitment, a mutual pledge of openness and trust, a promise that neither will walk away in difficult times. from that covenant of loyalty and love, new life comes into the world.
He goes on, marriage is not just living together, a temporary partnership for mutually beneficial ends. Heaven help us if that is all we see in it. It is the point at which the I of self meets the thou of another, transforming us into something larger, more spacious, more generous and tender than we could ever be on our own. In marriage at its best, you see humanity at its best.
Commitment is, as it were, the protective casing around our relationship. And the reason for that is that intimacy requires vulnerability. It's only when we're prepared to let others know what we're really like on the inside, when we're ready to talk about our hopes and fears, our dreams and disappointments, our strengths and weaknesses, that we achieve real intimacy.
And that vulnerability requires trust. We won't make ourselves vulnerable unless we trust the other person and trust that they won't use what we reveal against us.
And trust requires commitment. It's only when we know that the other person will stay with us through the highs and the lows that any relationship goes through that we're prepared to trust them.
That's what marriage is all about. Perhaps the best description of a good marriage comes in a line from Psalm 85. Love and faithfulness meet together.
A church wedding is structured around what the couple who are getting married say to each other. It's the vows, not what the priest or minister or marriage registrar says to them or over them, that makes the marriage. Because marriage is all about the commitment that you make to one another. We want you to take 10 minutes now to read through the marriage vows that you'll find in Appendix 3 in the back of your manual. And each of you decide which word or phrase or sentence is the most important for you, and then try to explain your choice to your fiancé.
We're going to speak now about what commitment means in practice.
If there was one thing we'd want you to take away from this course as an expression of your commitment to each other, it would be to set aside time on a regular basis to spend together.
Spending time together is one of those things that's an investment in a marriage, and we realised that only relatively recently we only realised what kind of impact it was having on our marriage, a very positive impact. And so really we try and spend as much of our free time together as we can now. We very rarely do anything anymore which is separate, whereas when we first got married, much of what we did was separate. And our lifestyles have both completely changed in that way, I think.
But you've instituted family days as well, haven't you? Richard, after the birth of our second child, Richard was, until then, was still pretty much spending a lot of time on his own at weekends. And I was quite panicked about having another baby, because then I'd be doubly stuck at home. And you decided to always spend Saturdays together as a family, whatever happened. So Saturday evenings we will spend together anyway, whether we're with other people or not. But during the day, we spend it together as a family. So if they go to a party, we all go to a party. You know, swimming, just whatever we do it together. And that's really helped. It's helped the boys as well.
Yeah, I think it was simply that I didn't realise that it was having such an impact on Pooh, particularly that, you know, when you're not spending time together, you really aren't living a life together. You really are living a separate existence, and it's not a marriage. And so really when we began spending a lot more time together, I think that immediately the positive effects started to show themselves. You know, we were so much more in love.
Special time with the person who matters most in our life, our husband or wife, doesn't just happen. We don't just mean being physically together in our house or flat, where one of us might be at the computer and the other is watching TV, or one making phone calls and the other paying the bills.
We're talking about making time that's different to the normal day-to-day routine. And there are two benefits of these times.
Firstly, they give regular opportunities for effective communication between us, so that we're deepening our understanding of one another. And secondly, these times keep the romance, the love and the fun alive in our marriage.
What we've found quite useful to get some sort of real quality time together is to have date nights about once a week, and to carve out a bit of time where we can just put the jobs down and say, right, sometimes it involves like just getting out the flat, because it's quite a small flat, so there's not a lot of space there, and we might just go down to the river and go for a walk, or sometimes it might involve just going to cinema where we're just being together, not really talking, but it'll basically just involve a change of the routine, and it'll be avoiding distractions, avoiding other people in terms of going out with friends, and it'll just be time for us to just do something together.
Or something that we enjoy doing, like we do enjoy dancing, so we might go dancing for an evening. But I think the best date nights are when we're actually when we can bear to stay in that house and just spend the time really talking about how we're doing, what we're feeling and thinking, not just what's been happening today, but what's really going on. And it takes a bit of time to get to the point where you draw that out of each other.
It might just be like sitting on the sofa and just, over a cup of coffee, and really just say, and asking the obvious question, how are you? How's it going?
Yeah.
What's happening for you at the moment?
Scilla and I have come to realise more clearly than anything else about our own marriage that if we're ever going to have special time together, we have to plan it and organise it in order to make it happen.
We're going to look at a few ways that we might do this. First, on a daily basis, secondly, on a weekly basis, and thirdly, on an annual basis.
First, then, on a daily basis. An important part of marriage is connecting with each other every day. Some people find mornings best, maybe over breakfast, asking each other what's happening that day. Others absolutely can't cope with mornings.
That's me. Although I have to say I've got a friend who's even worse, and she has to have at least 2 cups of coffee before she can so much as say hello to her husband. So evenings are definitely the best time for her.
Some people find speaking on the phone or emailing during the day is the best way for them to stay in touch.
And if one of you has to travel with your job, making contact every day will help you to stay connected.
One of the ways Scilla and I try to stay connected is to start each day by saying a short prayer. We simply ask each other, what can I pray for you today? And that helps us to know what's uppermost in each other's minds.
What's important is to create habits that are unique to us as a couple.
Otherwise, we can easily build negative habits. We've heard many couples speak of one falling asleep in front of the TV and the other going up to bed alone, and that definitely doesn't build closeness.
The way we react to each other first thing in the morning and the atmosphere that surrounds us as we go to sleep at night are very important, and these will be affected by whether we've connected with each other during the day.
Secondly, it's helpful to plan time together on a weekly basis. Throughout the 28 years of our marriage, I think we'd say that the single most important thing we've done in terms of investing in our relationship is to have a date together once a week. We've ended up calling this our marriage time.
Sometimes we set aside an evening and we might just stay at home. But if we do, we'll make the effort to have a special meal with candles on the table, we'll put on some nice music and generally make it feel romantic. Or we may go out. At other times, we do something completely different in the middle of the day. Something that we both enjoy, like going to an art exhibition, playing tennis or going for a walk.
Those who naturally have different interests may have to work a bit harder to find an activity that they both enjoy doing together.
We discovered before we first got married that we actually were quite different from each other. And
I like doing sporty things with balls, like playing tennis and playing golf and whatever. And that is not Inger's thing.
I love taking pictures and I love climbing.
And I'm afraid of heights.
So that wasn't going to work out. And I am just dreadful when it comes to hitting balls.
So after a bit of trial and error, we found out that we both quite like swimming. So that's what we try to do once a week together.
And that works quite well. We just take this one lane in the pool and we swim side by side and we talk the whole way through. So that's quite good.
Having a weekly date together has stopped us taking each other and our marriage for granted.
Most couples go on dates when they're going out and then stop going on dates when they get married. Nikki and I have discovered that we can only achieve marriage time on a regular basis if we do 3 things: plan it, make it a priority and protect it.
By planning it, we mean literally putting it in our diaries like any other appointment or meeting. One of the biggest changes when we get married is the need to coordinate our diaries and to consult each other over what goes in. That may be difficult for those who've led very independent lives, but it will prevent mix-ups.
We are such independent people. I worked for years and Paul has always worked, and then we got married and, well, we lived together, and constantly we're having to work around each other. You know, it's just sometimes a complete nightmare. We've had all sorts of incidences happen, and now, although it sounds quite trivial, we actually have to have diary meetings. You know, I'm sitting there, can we do diaries tonight? Because we just mess up so many times, really, don't we? Not informing each other of things.
Yeah, diary dates have been an interesting issue to work through. We've had some, as Amanda said, incidents. I remember one night that Amanda was in the shower, I think, and I was downstairs in the study doing some stuff, and the doorbell went. And this chap was stood there, a neighbour's friend who, one of us, we still can't quite remember who, invited him round for dinner, but never put it in the diary and completely forgot about the whole thing. So this young man was stood there with a lovely bottle of red wine and some flowers and an expectant smile on his face to come for dinner. So that went quite wrong. We invited him, had a drink and a chat, and he disappeared off in his car. And actually, we've never seen him since. So the diary is quite important to get that together.
Making a date together might seem a funny thing to do. You're living in the same house and around each other all the time, but that's exactly why you need to do it.
To make sure it happens, Cilla and I take it in turns to organise what we do each week.
Making this time a priority means that this is the most important commitment to stick to every week. It's a non-negotiable. It may mean prioritising it over our work, going out with friends, playing sport, going to the gym, going shopping, or doing up the house or the garden.
It's not that those things are unimportant, but unless time together as a couple is a higher priority, it probably won't happen, or we'll cancel it.
Lastly, we need to protect this marriage time from interruptions by friends, family, neighbours, the telephone and so on. For Nikki and me, the biggest problem is the phone. So if we're at home, we put on the answering machine with the volume turned down, and if we're going out, we turn our mobile phones off.
Marriage time, when planned, prioritised and protected, will have a very positive effect on any marriage. And we want to invite you all back 2 years or so into your marriage to do another course called the Marriage Course. And amongst other benefits, doing that course will be an opportunity for you to see if you're still managing to have a regular once-a-week date night.
Hopefully by then, it will have become a weekly habit that you just can't do without.
It's really important to have regular date nights. I mean, I found without marriage, you know, it's been really important, you know, the time that you have to bond and like, just sort of take stock and get together again on the intimate level.
Yeah, I think that catching up once a week has helped us both. You know, it doesn't matter what we do, whether we go for a walk in the park or go to see a film or have a pizza. It's just, I think it's that set time every week that has made the bad times a bit better, because you might have a really bad week where you're irritated with one another or with work or whatever, and then on that one day you just know that you've got to make an effort, and it always works.
Yeah.
Thirdly, we want to look at setting aside special time on an annual basis. Each year we try to work out and plan our holidays carefully. Holidays are important for every marriage relationship. When we first got married, our attitude was, we'll just see what turns up. But after a while, we realised that we spent almost all of our holidays with friends or family and none on our own.
Holiday time is time to relax, to have fun, to do things that we both enjoy together, with no deadlines, no stress, no one else's expectations, and away from our familiar home environment.
One thing we instigated in our own marriage early on was a mini honeymoon each year. When our children were small, we'd leave them with their grandparents and go away for 2 or 3 days on our own. And these mini honeymoons can help revitalise a relationship and rekindle romance again and again.
We definitely plan an annual event. We now have 2 children, and that annual event is a no children weekend, and it's so important to us to have that time, not just to rest, but actually to invest in each other and to do fun things, you know, slightly spoily things, but actually it just takes time to reconnect on some of the bigger things. But once a year, we're so looking forward to it. We've got one coming up. And it's like a big date weekend. We would have, prior to having children, we were doing that on a monthly basis, which is a little bit easier to achieve. But now we have children, it's definitely an annual event, but actually even more special because we realise how little time we get together when we have children around.
If you look in your manual, you'll find the next exercise called Planning Time Together. We want to suggest that you spend 15 minutes discussing how and when you might spend time together investing in your marriage on a daily, a weekly and an annual basis.
Now we're going to move on and look at another aspect of commitment, the change of loyalties. Our first loyalty in marriage is to our husband or wife.
This change of loyalties has important implications in lots of areas, but particularly for how we relate to our parents-in-law, and our wider family. We've already mentioned Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. For this reason, a man and a woman will leave their father and mother and be united to their husband or wife. We want to look first at what the leaving of mother and father really means in practice.
Our situations are all different. Some of our parents are around and live nearby, while others aren't. Some have great relationships with their families, while for others it's more difficult.
Whatever our situation, when we get married, our relationship with both sets of parents must be different to the way it was as we were growing up.
There needs to be what we call a new centre of gravity in our lives. When we're young, our home is like our centre of gravity. And as we grow up, we move out in wider and wider circles of exploration and independence, learning to walk, going to school, gaining more freedom as a teenager, and eventually living away from home.
But for many, even when they leave home, the centre of gravity continues to be their parental home, emotionally and in other ways. And they may return for comfort, encouragement, money, advice, or maybe just to get their washing done.
But once we get married, this needs to change. Our marriage relationship and our marital home becomes our new centre of gravity.
The leaving is not just about the place. It's not just a question of geography. There's also a psychological and emotional leaving that needs to happen. And we mustn't underestimate what a massive change this is.
A church wedding service sometimes includes a symbolic leaving. The person who's taking the service may use the words, "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" And the father of the bride, representing both parents, gives his daughter's hand to the person taking the service, who's representing God, who then gives her hand to her husband-to-be. And that action symbolises that both man and woman must leave their parents in order that the new decision-making structure, the new home, the new centre of gravity may be created by the couple.
But this leaving can be prevented or complicated if there's interference by parents, ongoing emotional dependence by a child on a parent, or the other way round. Any of those will set up tension and problems for the future.
I didn't have a problem with parent dependence when we got married, but I had a problem with Miles's dependence on his father and his father's dependence on him, because what would happen is every night I'd get home, we'd eat. As soon as we had time to be together, the phone would go, and it would be Miles's dad. And Miles's dad would be wanting to have some really long conversation with Miles, and it drove me absolutely demented. I hated it. And it was a big problem. And I said, Miles, we have to sort this out. We've got to do something.
Yeah, I felt terrible because my dad was in Canada on his own and not very well. And so, but I said to him, I was like, Dad, let's make a deal. Let's talk. When you get up in the morning, it's lunchtime my time, okay? Call me at the office. I'll have a sandwich ready and we'll talk. Give 15, 20 minutes, half an hour. And, you know, a few times there were a few wobblies. He kept calling us at night.
He didn't always
He didn't always do it.
I promise you.
Yeah, he didn't always do it. But it was he got with the program very quickly. It worked itself out really well.
But one night he rang and Miles was about to talk to him and I said, no, Miles, tell him what the agreement is. And Miles said, sorry, Dad, I can't talk to you now. I'll talk to you in the morning. He just put the phone down. And I think from that moment on, his dad knew we meant business.
Yeah. I felt terrible doing it, but the next day he was fine. He said, oh, hey, how you doing, you know?
And so it's essential that we put our husband or wife first before our parents. Our marriage relationship must be our top priority and our first loyalty.
This new centre of gravity means that as a married couple, we need to make our own decisions about things like the decoration of our house, our choice of holidays, our use of money, the tidiness of our home, the way we bring up our children, or even such mundane things as how we arrange our furniture.
I remember a woman who'd been married about a year telling me about a time when her husband had moved some furniture around their house with his mother. And she said it became a huge issue between them, not because she disagreed with the changes, but because she wasn't involved in the decision.
Once we've made our own decisions, we need to support each other and not revert to a childhood state of dependence, particularly when we're with our parents. This may be hardest to do when we visit our childhood home.
If we have a parent who tends to be controlling, for the sake of your marriage and in order to have a healthy relationship with our parents, we need to resist manipulation, even if they're helping us out financially. And it'd be better if it came to it to sacrifice the finances than to sacrifice our marriage.
While this leaving needs to happen, it doesn't mean that we stop respecting our parents. The fifth commandment, honour your father and mother, doesn't cease to be valid once we're married. Our aim is to build a mutually supportive relationship with them.
We realise some of you may have a difficult relationship with your wider family, but we want to encourage you to persevere in building these relationships.
We want to look briefly now at some practical ways that we can do this. Firstly, by showing gratitude for all that they've given us. A great way is to write a letter to them, perhaps just before you get married, thanking them for all that they've done for you. It's so easy to take our parents for granted. Even if you've had a difficult relationship with your parents, there are very few parents who haven't made any sacrifices for their children.
Secondly, it's good to stay in touch with our parents if we can, out of consideration for them. They'll tend to think more about us than we think about them.
And when it comes to keeping in contact, it's worth trying to take the initiative ourselves so that our parents don't feel they're the ones always making the first move. Decide together how often you're going to ring your parents, how regularly you're going to visit, if you plan to go on holiday with them, and generally how much involvement you expect them to have in your lives.
I think initially with our wider family, it was difficult for me to understand, my family being close and Pooh's family living in the States, apart from her brother. It was difficult for me to understand that Pooh really didn't operate the same way that my family did, and therefore when my family appeared at the door every other day for this, that or the other, I found it difficult to understand how Pooh could be threatened by that situation. And so it took us a few years really for me to learn to fend my family off.
They're really supportive. I mean, we have a fantastic relationship. But sometimes when you're newly married or you have new babies, new mums can feel threatened and overwhelmed rather than supported. So Richard didn't understand why I didn't want them necessarily to do my groceries or the laundry, and I couldn't say that to them because they're so lovely. And it took a while for Richard to realise that he had to be the interface between myself and his parents. Initially, we don't need to do that anymore. We're very open these days.
We also need to think carefully about Christmas or other major festivals. And we suggest you talk together about what you'll do. It's worth recognising that this can be a good opportunity to spend time with the wider family, and it can be really hurtful to shut them out. We find that when it comes to Christmas, we've had to be rigorous about taking it in turns with each set of parents. And we realise as well it could get a bit more complicated for us now that Kirsty's married.
In honouring our parents, it's helpful to recognise that we're not responsible to them any longer, but as they get older, we become increasingly responsible for them. They may need company or advice or practical help. And the day may come when they rely on us as we once relied on them.
And it's worth remembering that if we have children, our parents will be our children's grandparents. A relationship between a grandparent and a grandchild is unique and can be very special if we've nurtured our own relationship with our parents.
On this whole subject of the change of loyalties, many of you've probably discovered, or are in the process of discovering, just how much hard work is involved in organising a wedding. We want you to be aware that the leaving aspect of a wedding may well make it an emotional process too. With the hard work involved and loads of emotion flying around, there is bound to be tension and the occasional row, even in the most relaxed of families.
We want to encourage you to try to start your relationship with your parents on the right foot. And it's really not worth falling out with them over the wedding day if you can possibly avoid it.
We suggest that if there is conflict, you decide which things you care most passionately about and then compromise on the rest. It's obviously your day, but there is a sense in which it's also your parents' day. They may or may not be financially involved, but they'll certainly be emotionally involved.
I only really understood the depth of that emotional involvement when our daughter got married recently. And I listened to those vows in an entirely new way. And hearing our son-in-law promise to love and to take care of our daughter was one of the most moving moments of my life. Hearing the vows as a father gave me a completely new perspective.
And one final word of advice about parents. Make sure you only say you're just like your mother or you're just like your father when you mean it as a compliment.
Now, please turn to the next exercise in your manuals, Parents and In-Laws. And we're going to give you 10 minutes now to discuss as a couple what possible areas of tension you can foresee from that list, and then think about how you might go about resolving them.
We're now going to meet our guest couple, Jonathan and Andrea. They know something about commitment as they've been married 11 years and they have a 2-year-old son called Samuel.
Well, welcome, Jonathan and Andrea. Thank you so much for coming to join us today. First of all, can we ask you to tell us something about your own relationships with your parents and your parents-in-law since you've got married? What's that been like?
I think if I go first, for me, it was a sense of appreciation for both my parents and my in-laws, because as you go through marriage, you realize that they were making sacrifices and going through things without letting us know. For example, my mom is a very strong person, very strong woman, and yet with hindsight, I realized she was balancing being strong with modeling honor and respect for my dad, for our sakes, and going through this whole business of becoming one as a couple. I realized there must have been times when she was gritting her teeth and saving certain conversations for when they were behind closed doors for our sake. And, you know, so it's just been appreciation for what they went through.
And so that's been a great model for you, Andrea, coming
yes,
into
yes, it was.
And Jonathan, what about you? What about your
For me,
background?
I think it's been an appreciation of how I've had to change and how I've related to them.
Yeah.
Hindsight is always wonderful. But the year after we got married, we had the opportunity to go and live away in Japan for a year. And you're probably aware Japan is 12 hours away, both in terms of time zone and also in terms of flying time. So when you're there, you're pretty cut off.
Yeah.
And being there, we had to take lots of decisions on our own, which we did well, I think. And we got back and carried on doing the same thing. And we realized on occasion that the family would either be slightly surprised or perhaps even a bit disappointed that we hadn't consulted with them. And so we realized, okay, to keep everybody happy, we're going to have to start consulting a little bit more, valuing their opinions, but I think for the first time realizing that we'd have to take their opinions on board, but still value each other's opinions higher. And start with ourselves as being the core family unit.
Yes.
And, you know, learning from their experience and not, you know, trying to reinvent the wheel, but
Absolutely.
their opinions were just that.
We've talked quite a lot this session about the importance of making time together as a couple. And we'd love to hear how you have carved out time together as a couple.
with great difficulty, I
was gonna
think.
say, carving out is appropriate there.
It probably happened a lot more naturally before Samuel, because we were married for 9 years before we had Sam. And we found that it really takes a lot of discipline and decision to do it. One of the great things we heard an example of doing this year, which we've implemented, is just having downtime at the end of the day where you decide the cutoff at the end of the day, and over a cup of hot chocolate just sit down and celebrate the end of the day together and talk about what was good, and, you know, just talk for 10 minutes and have a time to do it. We've been trying, we're not doing it all the time, but at least we've set the objective that that's what we want to do.
And you've found that that makes a difference?
It really does.
It does. Andrea's father always used to say, one of his words of advice was, make time to make love.
Yeah.
And it is, you know, you might think that there's an agenda behind that, and sometimes the agenda is fulfilled. But it's if you don't make time, you find that you will tend to, over time, separate or pull apart. And certainly I find that you know, making time does have its rewards.
You can't have the hidden agenda.
One other thing we'd love to hear from you is, what does commitment mean for you in your marriage?
For us, well, for me, John will answer, I'm sure, but for me, it means security and trust. It's easy in the initial days to say you're committed, but when things get tough, really tough, you know, with things that you go through that could seriously damage a relationship, the security of knowing that we're in this for the long haul, that we're really going to live out for better or for worse. For example, Samuel is our miracle son, and that could have been, at times it was a real strain on our marriage, but the decision we took from early on was, in the nicest possible way, me and you against the world. Yeah. So whatever came at us, we would be doing it together.
I think for me, commitment is one of those funny words. I tend to think of it as one of those sort of gallant things. Through thick and thin, we'll be there together. There is thick and there is thin, and you just have to decide that you're going to do it. But I think also commitment for me is a decision to work through things regardless of what the world throws at you. Yeah. On a day-by-day basis, and one of the things that we do is, well, I've certainly taken on board the decision to work through any problems that we have, so that at the end of the day, even if it means I've got to back down, before we go to bed, we're going to go to bed in peace. And that's one of the things that I've decided to do, and so far it's worked very well for us.
Well, Jonathan and Andrea, thank you so much for coming to join us.
Thanks for having us. We want to introduce the homework for this session that's in the manual. We've discussed planning time together, but we also need to look at allowing time apart. There are two dangers of time apart. One danger is having too much. This is when a couple don't have enough shared interests, or their hobbies are very one-sided. For example, if you're into climbing and your fiancé isn't, our advice would be, don't expect to climb a mountain every weekend.
The other danger is not allowing our partner any space. And some people feel smothered if they're never able to do things without their husband or wife. We may need to adjust our expectations as to how much we will do together.
When we were first married, Henrik would get up on Saturday mornings once in a while and he'd say, you know what, it's a beautiful day, I'm going to head out and play a round of golf. And that was really hard for me to take, partially because I felt like it was a kind of rejection. It was Saturday, why didn't he want to spend Saturday morning with me? And secondly, I think as well, was just I hadn't had a chance to make any plans for myself. So it was sort of just waiting around for him to come back. And so after a few times of getting more and more sort of angry about it, we've been able to chat about it. And I've just realized Henrik needs to have more time away on his own than I do.
And we had a disconnect about the expectations on how much time we would spend together and how much time we would spend apart. And I think Inge's expectation was that we would spend all our free time together, and my expectation was that some of the time we could spend on our own and with friends. But then I had to learn that it's important for Inger not only that we spend time together, but also that she has been involved in the decision-making process. And now we plan a few days in advance, and then maybe I try to get up really, really early so I come back after a round of golf for a late breakfast, and we can have the rest of the day together.
Yeah. Having some time apart is healthy for a marriage. It gives us the opportunity to miss each other and makes it exciting getting back together.
Every couple needs to create their own balance of time together and time apart. And this balance will evolve over time.
I play football on Saturdays and sometimes midweek as well, so that gives Annie some time on her own to do whatever she does. And Annie's a real big painter, and she's got a studio at our house and takes time out to go up there and do some painting, hasn't he?
Yeah, but it wasn't always like this. I think there was a time when I almost had too much space. I really wanted to be involved in your life a lot more because I felt quite left out, and being new in London I found it quite hard. And so yeah, it kind of evolved, and I discovered that he loved football, and he discovered that I love art.
Yeah,
and it kind of just, he did football and it became my art time, so we just use the time that we're apart to do things that we enjoy.
Yeah, that the other doesn't, because she hates football and I hate art, so it works quite well.
So yeah, it's very important.
We hope the homework for this session will help you to start to think about your expectations for achieving that balance.
We're going to conclude the session with another of those readings from the Bible that you might choose for your wedding. And this one is taken from Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 to 7.
If you have any encouragement from being united in Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship from his Spirit, any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking on the very nature of a servant, made in human likeness. Rock and roll!
I'd like to finish with a short prayer. Lord, thank you for your commitment to us. Thank you that you came to serve us. Please help us to serve each other and to live out our commitment to one another throughout our marriage. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
We look forward to seeing you for the next session, when we'll be looking at how to resolve conflict. Until then, goodbye.
Goodbye.